Of course, it's
rules,
garbage
right?
in, garbage out. Is
Yeah.
garbage in, garbage out. I mean, as simple as that, right? If your data that you use is partially based on historical bias because of redlining, because of everything that we have done that we thought was okay, and now is manifesting itself in present day 2023, of course it needs to be fixed. And that was why CFPB came out a couple of months ago and said, hold your horses for all of you guys that are using AI in your automated credit decisioning. Make sure you can explain what you're doing if you are rejecting someone's.
Hey, Tedd Huff here. Ever thought about how you could streamline your application and underwriting process? Well, let me introduce you to Under. Why keep using the outdated methods of PDFs when you can digitize them effortlessly? All you gotta do is upload the PDF, send it out for digital signature, and voila, you're set for the digital age. Are you curious how to make that happen? Head over to under.io/FTC and get started for free. It's really that simple. Welcome to Fintech Confidential, bringing you the people, tech, and companies that change how you pay and get paid. Welcome to another episode of Fintech Confidential's UNCUT, where we talk about subjects without any limitations, without any restrictions, and truly share where we're thinking, what we're thinking, and how we're thinking about these topics. This week, or this episode, geez, I've been on so many episodes this week, but on this episode, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, how it plays in fintech, how it maybe shouldn't play in fintech, and a handful of the things that have been announced here recently around NVIDIA. Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan has made a few comments in the recent news, and I'm going to get the perspective from our guests. Now, this week, I did it again. On this episode, this is going to be fun. On this episode, I have Theo Lau. She is an author. She has her own consulting company. She's been speaking all over the globe here recently, and I think one of the big pieces that I'm looking forward to her perspective is from her latest book around Web3 and the financial economy and how that impacts everything. She's going to bring a really unique perspective. And we brought Matt Vanhouten back to the show, got him in here, and we'll love to see his perspective because he keeps track very closely to what's going on in fintech. So the first question I want to ask everybody, and we'll kick it off with Theo. You're the new one here, so we'll kick off with you. The first question is, how do you define AI, and do you feel that it might be a slightly overused acronym?
How about I do it the other way around? Because I like to cause trouble. AI is not magic. Here you go. That's
what
I said it.
Oh, come on.
Magic is illusion. And AI does a lot of interesting things. It's not magical. It's math. It's math. It's literally numbers. That's how I look at it. And it's been around. It's been around for a long time. It's been around even before the whole ChatGPT hype that it brought about, more than a year ago now. I think it was November last year. So it is really interesting technology. It can do a lot of really interesting things for how we live and how we work. I'm pretty sure this is like a very non-controversial comment. We haven't even touched the surface of what it can do. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting.
Oh, Matt, where's your perspective? Give us a little bit of your perspective on the whole AI piece of it, and then I'll give mine.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I totally agree with everything Theo just said, but I'm gonna sort of come back around to, I think that the terminology and how it sort of influences the way people in the public perceive what is potentially actually there versus what's truly there. And, I think there's language, in my view, creates our reality, both in terms of how we understand the world and in terms of how we convey a description of something that then allows someone else to then have their own. So we create mutual understanding through language in large part, right? It's not the only way, but it's one of the biggest ways that we do that. So whenever we start with a framework and we say like, this is intelligence, it's already really a brand versus a description of what's underneath the hood. It's not intelligence, not yet. Maybe there's a lot of debate around, perhaps not ever. Some really smart people think, yeah, we're going to get to a period where technologies that are sort of similar to the underlying structure of ChatGPT can be autonomous thinking entities. And there's a lot of other really smart people that say, no, I mean, maybe it'll happen, but not with anything close to the frameworks that we're working with now. So I think for one, it's just the key question I have is like, are we talking about like technology that can do something that's a tool, right? So like, let's just talk about what is a technology that can solve a problem, and then what can it do? And then separately, the more philosophical question of like, what is consciousness? And, is this an independent being? It's like, I just think we're so far away from needing to actually answer the second question, given the truth of what the capabilities are right now, that it starts to create like a new narrative that I think, coming back to Theodora's main point, is being in large part fed by those who are driving the early innovation in this space to, in my view, scare people into creating oversight that they then write the rules around and can control, right? So if you tell everybody, this thing is really scary, you need to only have it be in trusted hands. And my hands are the most trusted.
Yeah, that even goes into the whole decentralized fear of decentralization. But we'll leave that one out for today's discussion. From my perspective, I look at it from we've had to simplify down the numerous things that have been going on, from pattern recognition, some sort of automated learning, some human directed or human decisioned movements and behaviors that go behind that. And it was just easier to create this nice big bucket called artificial intelligence, because from my perspective, looking at it, the reason why people feel comfortable calling it artificial intelligence is because it's mimicking decisions that we have made in the past and regurgitating or presenting information that already exists. And for a lot of people, that feels intelligent, and it's more about a feeling than the reality.
Yeah, so it's like that horse that could, tap codes in like the 1910s or 20s or something, and everyone's like, "My God, this horse, it can communicate." It's I can't remember who was doing it, P.T. Barnum maybe, or one of those sideshow type of people. And it was very convincing. A lot of people were fooled into thinking that this horse actually was a sentient thinking being that could tell you its thoughts and stories. And then, eventually it became clear what was really going on. It was, taking direction from somewhere else, and I think we want to believe in sentience in hosts other than human minds. I mean, this is something that goes back, I don't know, maybe forever, right? Whether it's, God, the idea of like a God, the idea of like mythical like spirits, or the forest having, a mind. Like, we want to know that there are other things in the universe that can think. And so it's very attractive. It doesn't take very much to then convince people to say, yeah, that's thinking,
Yeah, but I would chime in here. I like what you just said. And it reminds me of something that Clara de Rodier, she loves to say. Algorithms have parents, right? We often tend to forget that these things, they don't exist in a vacuum. These things were created by humans. What they do was dictated by how we program it, by what we teach. don't just come into being. So we need to stress that part a little bit more.
Totally.
Well, and it's funny you bring that up, Matt, is I was at an event earlier this week where we were having a very similar discussion to what we're having today, more around AI and what's truly innovative and in different areas. And I'm going to ask you guys for your perspective on the fintech piece, but the part that I thought was interesting is that some of the scientists that were there, data scientists and biological scientists, talked about they're excited to use artificial intelligence to figure out how plants talk to each other, how cells within the body can understand what's going on. So they're leveraging these models to really try and dive in a little bit deeper into the why. And the part that made it really interesting to me, especially based on your comment, is that they're trying to give it a human persona every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And how many movies do we have where animals are humans, right? Well, were there 3 launched this year that were really focused around that, at least that I know of? Heck, who knows how many more? But that's the other areas on how they're looking at it. From the fintech side.
Do you think that's a problem in their? So take, for example, I think there's pre-AI, there's been a lot of interesting research in the last several years that does point to some kind of an interaction happening, like between plants and humans, that we don't understand. And I'm not going to say it's sentience that's at play there, but there's some kind of information exchange that's happening that goes beyond what we can see and, what we know about like cell biology. And so I wonder, like, I think exploring that further, to me, like as a goal is a good one. The question I have is like, because we've already anthropomorphized AI and we're very happy to continue to do that with whatever the object of our study is, I guess, are we bringing so much bias into just the framework for examining the question that we're automatically kind of like skewing the likely results to try to create an answer that says, well, clearly this is speech, or this is thought, or this is understanding, because that's what you're looking for. You think that's what it is, and you're going to find it.
Theodora, I saw the gears turning in your head as he was talking through that. This is a kind of a topic that you brought up in your book, really around how to use it for good, not evil. I'm summarizing, right? It's like how to use it, how to use the Web3 direction and all these new technologies for good. Do you think maybe we're taking it too far?
No, I think you're probably referring, actually, this is more in sync with my first book, Beyond Good, which was written during COVID. And in there, that was when we were looking at technologies such as longevity tech, AI, and what have you, that has been around for a while, and what companies are using them to improve financial inclusion, and help, for example, smallholder farmers to get access to credit. So those things I think is really interesting. It has real world implications. I like, Matt, what you just said about the interaction or relationship, I don't know, lack of a better word, between plants and people, because it reminds me of something that actually I think my parents taught me. This was little, it stuck to my mind, that they told me that the plants respond to human presence. If you have bamboos and you have greens in the house and you're around, the plants will thrive. If you ignore it, just let it sit there in the corner by themselves, you're never home, it doesn't work well. And it's one of those, I used to call it ancient Chinese secret, like things that just get passed down from generations. But you're right. I mean, the universe is mysterious, and it works in a mysterious way. That sounds like a lyric. But there are a lot of things that we don't understand.
Probably is in some song somewhere. Yeah.
Probably, right? I'm absolutely not well versed in the entertainment area, but it probably is. So it goes back to, we have this amazing set of technologies, amazing amount of resources, seemingly endless, at our disposal. Then the question becomes, what are you going to do it for? Well, what are you going to use it for? And who will have a voice at the table to decide what you will use it for? And I think that's my worry. I'm not worried about the technology itself. I'm more worried about who will have to say so and saying, this is the direction we're going. And it goes back a little bit to what Tedd, you and Matt were talking about, in terms of the evolution of the technology and all the things that we're using it for. Who has the authority to sit there and say, well, no, this is not a good direction, or yes, we need to double down on this.
It's funny as you mentioned that the plant and your parents teaching you that if you just leave it in the corner and you don't pay attention to it, it dies. I'm going to hold a lot of truth in that, because I bought this beautiful, beautiful plant that was a beautiful ficus. It was designed and turned into a bonsai, and I got busy with a whole bunch of stuff. And I mean, I still watered it, right? But like, I watered it, but then I came back from a trip and it was as if it just gave up. It just as if it gave up. And now I look at it and it's still sitting in that corner because I feel bad that happened. But, those are the types of things that we have to kind of think through as we look at how are we going to leverage this type of technology. And, exchange of value, money or otherwise, is something everybody holds close, because that's how we live. That's how we get and or give things. That's just how we move forward in our daily lives. I'm going to jump into the fintech side of the house. We've talked about the philosophy piece of it, but let's dive into the fintech. There's a handful of companies that are really diving into the artificial intelligence side of the house. And that's what their business is based on, at one of the many layers in artificial intelligence. You've got everything from your machine learning, you've got your models and your life piece of it. And then you just continue to grow out from it. And then you also, you have the behavioral. I skipped the life behavioral piece of it. And then we would get into the sentient part that Matt had brought about. But going back all the way down to the data analytics and the machine learning piece of it, Theo, as we were talking before we hit the record button, it's not new. It's been around a really long time. Matt, you and I have talked about that.
Yeah. My first experience working with it's a combination of machine learning and pattern recognition to automate capturing information from financial documents was in like 2002, 2003. And it worked really well. And this was not simple, just like, standardized font, kind of like being able to read that technology. That's like optical character recognition. And then that moved into intelligent character recognition. I think OCR is like from the 60s, maybe 70s, like a long time. Magnetic ink kind of predates both of those. So the ability to take a magnetic signature from text. So we've been using technology to take things that previously had to be like looked at by a person and then transferred by either hand or some other mechanism from one place to another place. Like if you go back to the magnetic ink example, that's definitely since at least 60s, right? And then it's progressively gotten as both the imaging capabilities have improved, so you actually have a better signal coming in. Now you have a really high resolution document, and then I can examine all the bits on the map, and I can now put those through software. The software then you can develop lots of different techniques to try to like figure out, like, based on what I see in that map, how do I make sense out of this, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so that technology has been it's been working fairly well and actually doing a lot of, I would say, good, right? I mean, I think this is something I'd really love to get into is like, automating work that was being done by a person over time, I feel is a good thing. However, sometimes it can be so fast in terms of the transition where like automation can replace human labor so quickly that we don't do is recognize the impact that has on real human lives and invest in ways to support everyone, right? And so it's like we automate to save money for, like, this time I was working at JP Morgan, right? So JP Morgan's saving a bunch of money. JP Morgan's customers are saving a bunch of money. But then employees who used to do data capture don't have a job anymore. And we say, well, they should learn how to become software engineers.
Well, and that's funny.
That's not a very realistic transition.
That's one of the pieces, that when I was doing the research and really diving into to kind of understand why some banks have dove in head first, other banks are taking a wait and see approach. Good old Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan made a comment that he feels that it will eliminate jobs, and that it will reduce the workload of today down to 3.5 hours a week.
Well, I think, for one, he can say with certainty, and I know this because he was the CEO when I was there, it already has eliminated jobs, right? And it will continue to eliminate jobs. To me, this is like some of the significance that we're placing on a statement that a person makes today is mostly just because the popular kind of like people just know about it, right? But to Theodore's point from early on, these impacts have been happening for a very, very long time. They're just accelerating. And I think the question is now like, and now people can like, I actually feel like this is one of those situations where, remember I was saying the language creates reality and it helps us to each like really kind of develop our own common understanding. I think like wonky software type nerd folks already knew all this stuff, but it was hard to convey to those who weren't in that world. But then once you can interact with this chatbot and then you suddenly see, oh my God, wow, right? A lot of this stuff was possible, maybe not the generative side of things. I think we sort of overvalue what generative AI really can do for real problem solving. But it gives people the idea of like, whoa, I didn't know this was possible, right? And now they start thinking about what if in a way that wasn't really happening quite as much before.
And I almost wish that we would have been a little bit more thoughtful in rolling that out. I think one of my biggest gripe with how events have unfolded the last 13 months is that, hey, we have this thing. Here you go. Oh, oops, it caused trouble. Oh, by the way, we forgot to tell you, X, this is in beta. Take it with a grain of salt. All right? You started a race, and now everyone is dumping stuff out there and then going back and say, oops, sorry. I love tech. Don't get me wrong. My entire journey has been around tech.
You're
and
among
I love
friends.
Toys.
We're all we all have the tech bug. I think we get that. Yeah.
So I love it, but there is, to a certain extent, needs to have a little bit of responsibility and accountability, and I don't see that.
Where do you think that should be coming from? Like whose job is it to hold whoever accountable for?
Don't get me started on this one.
Oh boy.
That's good then. I think we need to poke on this one then, Ted.
That was a good poke. It was a good poke. I mean, realistically, I look at it as it should never be a government, period.
Why?
Who should it be? Do you think people that have an inherent interest in getting a big pie, we can trust them to come and say, oops, I'm going to hold back?
I think it should be...
It's a rhetorical question, by the way.
Oh, okay. You stuck me with the rhetorical. No, I mean, and I'll even go a little bit further. Like, the problem I have with governments making decisions on just about anything is because it's based on limited understanding and limited information, and they don't understand any potential side effects to restricting the flow of things and or people. So that's the piece that I say I don't like the idea of our governmental piece playing in it. I also
Ted, what if all they did was said, you need to disclose anytime you are interacting with a customer through an artificially powered something persona, let's just say.
So you don't end up with a Sports Illustrated issue of fake profiles and
like
things
if you're going to use
AI.
it, you need to disclose that it's here, right? Like the thing you're interacting with right now is not a human being. Like is that something that you think the government should enforce as a requirement?
You make a good point.
You're putting him on the spot.
I know, and
that's what UNCUT's all about.
Exactly. I mean, if it is a general direction of something like that you should know, it should do no harm. It should not cause any problems.
Like, wait, so you would not have a problem with that sort of
like the generality of it, but that isn't what governments do, though.
So it sometimes is, right? It's not. I agree that there's overstepping, but someone has to decide if someone's going to put a rule in like that, right? It won't be the platforms that are building these tools, right? It will need to come from
it'll
someone
never
else.
Be the platforms.
And this is why Sam Altman and company, they want to go to DC and they want to say it needs to be regulated. And these are the specific things that it should be regulated around, which, surprise, surprise, are likely to be favorable to OpenAI and Microsoft, right? Like that's the sausage making process in reality.
Well, and that brings me into the other question that I had is like, how comfortable should we be, or how are you guys looking at the fact that you've got two major tech companies that are really driving, and there's a kind of a third one you can kind of sneak in there because they haven't been as public about it, but you've got OpenAI / Microsoft. You've got Google that just launched Genesis.
I think this is the thing we found out after everything played out last time around. It's Microsoft.
They have a
OpenAI is not an independent organization. They are Microsoft's subsidiary in all but, legal paperwork.
So who else other than Microsoft
was Amazon is where I was going. But
so wait, Microsoft, Google, Meta,
Amazon,
and Amazon.
Meta? They are using it as a self-serving piece. They are not opening it up to be able to be used in multiple different areas.
But none of them are, right? That's my point in saying that OpenAI and Microsoft is really Microsoft. It's being fed. Microsoft's not putting 15 billion, 20 billion, whatever is ultimately going to be delivered to build that tech because they think it's good for humanity, right? They may think it's good for humanity, but that's not why they write the check, right? They write the check because it's good for Microsoft. And there's and they want Sam Altman there because they think he's good for what Microsoft wants OpenAI to do, which is publish more stuff and go faster and like get this out. So I do think it's important to just recognize they all have self-interest. None of them are doing this from a position of the greater good. Even if as individuals, they may think that way, as corporations,
they do not.
They're not allowed to because of being who they are, right? They're capital constrained, public market driven entities that have no choice but to keep growing.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I really was thinking more about was I, as a person, can have a direct relationship with the language model or multimodal model, depending on which platforms you choose to use. Whereas with Meta, you get a user interface that's through their systems, and it doesn't really allow the building on top of, but the more interaction within Meta. At least that's been my experience.
However, if you look at what they did with chatbots in the Messenger platform, they opened their platform for brands to integrate with their APIs to deliver conversational experiences between bots and users on the platform. This is no different, right? I think what they're doing is they are, in addition to that, they're building their own persona that you can then, have as your friend. It's like part of your. Maybe you don't have any real friends. You can at least have one. You get your meta buddy.
Wasn't that a movie?
It's been a couple movies. Yeah, they usually. Yeah, Lars is that one? Lars and the Real Girl. Is that the one you're thinking of?
Yeah, and then there's another one too, and I can't remember what it was, but.
Oh yeah. I know the one. I haven't
the guy where he falls in love with the AI bot.
Her.
Mm-hmm.
Her. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh yeah.
Oh, so Theodore, we've been like going back and forth. Where do you lie in all of this craziness that we're talking about here?
In terms of what?
I'm just perspective, thoughts. What have you seen around, like, realistically? You get to meet a lot of people as you go and travel and do your speaking engagements. And I've actually been at a couple where you've talked about the subject. Just trying to understand, are these big conglomerates a concern? Are they not a concern?
Of course they are.
What are you hearing and feeling, especially around the fintech world?
Because if you think about it, right, we look at artificial intelligence and the whole slew of technology as something that can be very transformative to how we work and how we earn a living and how we live, period. It's going to change our lives. If that's the case, and I go back to then who...
I'm sorry, just Theodore, could I pause on that for a second?
Okay.
Do you believe that?
I do eventually. Not right now. I think eventually it will change. Could you
paint the picture for me around how better technology allows me to not work as much versus I just am working more jobs and delivering more value to the shareholders?
No. See, this is what we're talking about. You had a whole notion of assuming the direction was going. I didn't say we're going to work less.
You said it's going to make our lives better. So if I'm working the same amount,
it will change.
Okay. Maybe I need to listen better. Okay, tell me again, because I think I misheard.
It's
change
right.
our lives.
That's what I tell my husband on a daily basis. But it would change how we work, and it would change how we earn a living. So let's say, for example, going back to the example that you guys are talking about in banks, right?
Mm-hmm.
The technology has replaced, the automation has replaced some of the things that we used to do manually. And also, now, if you overlay that with human longevity since early 1900s, and Tedd, you probably heard this, we have earned and gained an extra 30 years of healthy living. Now, if you take a step back, look at me. I just turned 50 last month. My parents have been bugging me for the last year. Why aren't you retired yet? Context, my mom retired when she was 49. What am I going to do for the next 50 years? Sit at home, twiddle my thumb? First of all, I cannot afford it. Second of all, no, that's boring. So just by this really small example, and I look all around me, we have changed how we work. We have changed how long we work. I was just reading a report earlier today that is talking about the fastest growing group of people who are still working. By the way, that's not a good news, are people that are older than 75. I would say part of it is because they cannot afford to stay living in a, certain standard, if you will. They just can't afford it if you live an extra 20 some years longer. So they have to stay working. But technology also allow us to change how we work, right? People are going into semi-retirement, not full retirement, because now you have access to tech that you can work remotely, for example. So it has changed how we work. That doesn't mean we're working less.
Is it? I guess I'm curious if you think that if you look at this future that you're envisioning, and how does it make you feel?
How many drinks do you want? I don't have enough.
I did not prepare with adult beverages. So now I'm starting to feel like I should have.
I know.
Yes.
I get my mimosa going. It's still mid-morning in my time zone.
It's 2:00. I can start my whiskey bottle. But it's more, I think that is a really broad question that needs a little bit of onion peeling. Because I think how we deal with it and the impact of it on a lot of people in the United States, in the UK and Europe is going to be very different than the impact of it for people in global south, for people that are in emerging economies. I think that's where we don't do a good job because we generalize things a lot. So going back, for example, to the example, I think earlier we were talking about AI and the ability with image sensing technology and recognition and all of that to allow smallhold farmers to get access to microcredits. That's been going on. So for example, my bank in Asia, they have used a 310 model for microlending. 3 minutes to assess your credit, 1 second to dispense the credit, 0 human interaction. And they do it because they have a huge database of data about you as a person and about you as a small business owner. So that's how they use to de-risk some of their lending decision. And boom, here you go. You're a farmer. We have the ability, you take a snapshot of the crops you're growing. We know who you are. We know what you're growing. We validate that this is a growing crop. This is how we assess the risk. Here you go, $10 microloan, right? So that has changed how people earn a living, if you will, because now they have access to a little bit of money to get farm equipment, to get fertilizers, and et cetera, et cetera. So and that
who's driving that in terms of like is it a profit motive primarily?
Of course, it's private.
Well, it's not always. Microloans aren't necessarily the best business model, so it's it
works for Ant. My bank is part of Ant.
I see. But is it purely about like monetizing the loans, or is it because they've got this massive platform network play, and then they're getting people deeper and deeper into the super app experience?
The super app has been around for 8 years. Come on, we're just catching up to it.
What's been around for 8 years?
Super app. Super app's been alive and well in Asia since, I don't know.
Oh yeah, super app's not coming to the US though. So it's a very different sort of. I'm just curious if their approach to kind of micro lending, is it actually about profit on lending, or is it about an ecosystem?
I think it can be both. It doesn't have to be either or, does it? It can be both. It can be you are doing good while you're doing well. I mean, that's the whole thing about the book.
So so that would suggest, back to Tedd's point, let it ride, right? Like, don't get in the middle.
And they have been. No one is getting in the middle of my bank, right? But that tech is used for a very particular purpose. Now, if you fast forward to where AI is and what people want to use, this is when governments start getting into the middle. Like, oh, whoa, wait a minute. What exactly are you doing in here? And we need to pay attention because the technology evolves and grows, right? It doesn't stay static.
And is that, I guess, are you thinking that for Ant in this example, they should be supervised in the use of like how they apply like the decisioning logic for who gets a loan and who doesn't?
No, not so much so that, but more so in what exactly are they doing, and do some of the parts and pieces need to be broken up? I think that's been very public.
Antitrust.
Yeah. Yeah.
What if there are biases in their data set that are favoring one group over another?
What if? There's always bias in data.
But I thought that was a problem. Isn't that a problem that we need to have help solving?
You're asking Ted, you're asking me.
I don't know, Ted, what do you know about Ant Financial and whether they need to be regulated because of their potential misuse of biased data?
I don't think it's Ant Financial only. Ant Financial. I think it is across the board, whether you're a financial institution lender, a non-financial institution lender, anybody that extends some sort of credit has their own biases. But that also goes into what they believe to be their risk tolerance. That's why we have so many different options. That's why there are so many options around the world to be able to get lines of credit. I mean, heck, I could go to my neighbor and ask them if I can borrow a cup of sugar. Their bias around that cup of sugar and whether or not they think that I'm a good neighbor is going to make that decision. So even when you get into the machine learning and any sort of generative AI, you're going to have those biases because the individual people that have made the decisions on what they feel comfortable with for their organization are going to be baked right into it. And so
I agree.
We're humans.
But
That's
in
Exactly.
the U.S. at least, there are laws as well that deal with the fair, use of how you apply credit, right? To, there's a lot of information that has historically been used to disqualify borrowers, right?
There is, and it
that was
still
very much
happens.
discriminatory.
That
it
still
totally
happens.
happens.
That's not history. It's still present day. There
It
are
still
still
happens.
people that do not get access to the credit that they need because of the color of their skin, because of historical bias in data. That still very much happens. There are still people
Yes.
who aren't able to sell their house at the price they want because of pictures that they have in the house. That has not changed. Come on. Let's
I'm not
be
saying
silly.
I'm not saying the problem is solved. I guess my question to the both of you is, should AI be subject to those same
Of course,
rules,
it's garbage
right?
in, garbage out. Is
Yeah.
garbage in, garbage out. I mean, as simple as that, right? If your data that you use is partially based on historical bias because of redlining, because of everything that we have done that we thought was okay, and now is manifesting itself in present day 2023, of course it needs to be fixed. And that was why CFPP came out a couple of months ago and said, hold your horses for all of you guys that are using AI in your automated credit decisioning. Make sure you can explain what you're doing if you are rejecting someone's loan
So Ted,
application.
you started off earlier by saying you don't want the government anywhere close to making any decisions about the.
I think he had fine prints there.
I really struggle with when they get super granular. That's the biggest piece, is that when you get down to saying you must do this, and it is down to a data level or a data field, or it is attached to something that has additional ramifications to it without identifying it. That's where I really, really struggle with that.
Is your struggle because of government saying, yes, you cannot do certain things? Or is that your struggle because the government may or may not have the right resources and the people who know what they're doing to be able to set up those guidelines? Because that's two different things.
Yeah, I think mine is more around that we are humans and we become very biased very quickly, especially when money and people and proximity effect starts to kick into effect as well. And that increases the gap between total understanding and the knowledge that they have. And that's the piece that I really, really struggle with governments. And I will go on record saying this. I don't agree with lobbying. That's a big piece that really, really bothers me. The lobbyists should not be able to go in and do that. And it's not just the US, it's other places as well. It really
Legal
should.
bribery.
Should exactly. But it should come down to, they actually should have to talk to the people in their communities, not listen to people that represent the people, represent their people, right? It's like it's gotten so far away. And there are countries where bribery is still alive and well.
I mean, it happens everywhere, right? It's just the extent to which it's endemic, perhaps, is measure in terms of like how widespread and how influential it's. I mean, someone is getting removed from the House of Representatives in part because of some of those accusations that have kind of gotten to an extent where, for the first time in a very long time, there's action being taken, right? So it still happens here, and I agree with you on that front. The one thing I would say though is and this is sort of the thing, having worked for mega corporations and knowing the people who work there, and I know they're not evil. I know they're actually like really nice, good people, human beings, but they represent a set of interests that are not human beings, right? So this is the thing around like corporations are people, that whole like Supreme Court decision that came out that like has had huge implications in lots of different areas. One of the things that I've noticed is like, it doesn't matter if you're a good person if you're working for a public corporation. The public corporation has a set of interests that don't care about inherently things that are maybe important to you as a person. But one of the things that they would do, and I know this because I also have friends who were on government relations, that worked in those jobs. They really did see one of their key missions of informing lawmakers. And you come to the point around they don't know enough, right? And it's true. How are they going to learn? In part, they've got to learn from the industry. They don't need to do what the industry tells them to do, but you need to work with people who actually work in the industry to know what the industry is doing, So it's a tricky one. It's very, very difficult to say, because we said there's no lobbyists, and that means anyone that's not a elected member cannot have a conversation, and you're not from my district, right? I can't have a conversation to help inform you about the, understanding this technology and its implications better. I think it is a tricky situation, but not informing lawmakers, and you can call it lobbying. I think that's generally what it would be referred to as. It's like they do need to be educated, and sometimes the only people who can educate them are the ones who are working in the space. A think tank doesn't necessarily have access to what's really going on in business. They're smart people, but you've all worked with people who are not inside the companies, right? They're consulting on the outside, perhaps, maybe know a lot around the overall picture, but don't really know about the nuts and bolts of what's happening inside. And so you got to trust over time that lawmakers are doing their jobs. I think there's not much faith in that. And that's probably why you probably have these concerns, Ted. I think I share them too.
So
I just don't know who else can do it. I don't know what the alternative is.
So, I mean, really the two places that I've seen it not work is, especially when you look at all the regulatory that they try to put around credit cards and debit cards, those never work because there's always another loophole. There's always something else.
They never work in terms of what outcome, right?
Well, the outcome that they're hoping for is reduced costs
to
the end consumer. That's a fool's errand, because they're always the corporations and the companies and the businesses are always looking for additional ways to generate revenue. And they will always leverage any sort of regulatory piece that provides something to go against in order to generate that revenue. Then you look at a number of other areas when it really starts to come into the investment side of the house. I may not be listed as a person, I may not be listed as an accredited investor, but that doesn't mean I don't understand the market. That doesn't mean I don't understand the company in which I'm investing in. It doesn't mean any of that stuff. But because I don't have a certain net worth, because I don't have a certain background, because I don't have a certain thing, I can't invest in the things that I want to invest in, because they believe because I don't have that money, I don't know how money works. And so like things like that are
which is excluding access, right? Like it's like making
exclusionary. And I think that's a good point.
It's putting a layer in between that a small group of very wealthy folks can then kind of have
increase
a lot more
their wealth,
control. And they get to participate in these markets that are closed off to the public, right?
So let me ask you this, Ted.
Yeah, go ahead, Thea.
So looking at what we have in here, hear loud and clear what you do not like. What do you think about what the EU is doing with respect to data privacy and AI? Because their approach is very different than ours.
Yeah, I mean, data
do you
privacy.
think what they're doing is working? Or at least is helping somewhat?
I don't know.
I'll give you a quick example.
I don't know if it's helping.
Right.
I think it makes people feel good.
So was it?
Isn't that what
yesterday?
we're here for? To feel good?
Group hug. But Apple, right? Apple yesterday, they said they're going to open up their tap to pay technology to competitors in part because they are under immense pressure from the EU that we're going to sue them. So wouldn't you think that might be one sliver of hope that perhaps regulation does do something? Trick question.
I don't think it's the right approach. I think attacking individual companies is not the right approach. And
would that be an attack though? I mean,
it is.
They're just
When
telling
you single out an
work with
individual
others.
person or corporation about something you don't like that they're doing,
but
that
they're
is an
harming
attack.
Customers.
yeah,
Right.
they're hoovering up all the volume and they're charging the fee that they get to decide what
Yeah.
the price is. There's no constraint in the market that can affect like what they choose to do. Like they
'Cause
don't
they're
have
the
a natural
gatekeeper.
competitor. So it's either break them up, right? Antitrust kind of steps in and actually have to like break up the company, or they agree to these kinds of things, right? Like I think it's like if you think a world that's full of monopolies is a good place for us all to inhabit, then I think that's the other extreme, right? Is like don't do anything. Apple and Google and these handful of companies eventually they run everything, right? And I don't think we want that either, right?
But this brings me back into the whole idea around my perspective and really how I look at the Web3 side of the house is like, I really believe that providing the ability to be self-sovereign and how I move my information, myself and everything, and making it distributed versus centralized within these organizations is really the place that I think we can do the most good is to allow for that to happen and not to restrict that from.
So let me ask you a
sorry, go ahead,
rhetorical.
Theodore.
Yeah.
No.
I was going to say, let me ask you a rhetorical question. Let's say that is the ideal path to go forward. What would you do with the big tech companies right now? Are you going to, as a government, tell them, hey, you know what you're doing is not good. Stop it. Then that will be part of stepping in. Now, to your point, if we're going to let them go and do how the free market dictates, that's not going to change either because they have all the resources.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a piece that reminds me that I'm not normal. I'm not like most people. Because I even remember back looking at really when I was learning about blockchain down to the bits and bytes level and figuring out how it works and the distributed ledger technology that it represents and thinking about all the really cool stuff you could do to trace and track things. And it got like super down into the weeds. And this is where I'm going to bring it back to the artificial intelligence discussion, right? This is where I think that forms of AI can be really helpful because one of the thoughts that I had was it would be really, really cool that if I could see where fractions of pennies go every time I pay my taxes. I want to see everywhere that it goes. Every last 100th of a penny, I want to know where it goes. And if I don't want to fund it, I want to be able to say stop funding. And to me, like giving that level of control and access would be awesome for me. But most people don't want to go that deep. Most people want to say, here's what I believe at a really, really high level. Please tell me what I should or should not do. And I think that's the place where we get really, really dangerous areas. And that's kind of where we're at today. At least that's how I feel with these big companies telling us how we should or should not feel. I have a similar feeling around religion, but we won't talk about that today. We've already hit on politics.
I guess, Ted, what you're describing is like, it is definitely a very different approach to organizing society, right? Along those lines.
Allow me to be autonomous. Just allow me to be autonomous. That's all I ask.
And somewhere between then and now, we have these giant companies that are becoming larger all the time. And I mean, we can come back to the OpenAI Microsoft conversation for a second, right? Microsoft's been exposed to plenty of its own antitrust issues. Mm-hmm. Now they own effectively the leading developer of this particular generation of AI capabilities. Mm-hmm. And whether they want to keep it open or not keep it open or put it inside Bing and that's it, right? Like, they're going to be able to make that decision, absent some kind of external, either market force. There's only two options, right? Market forces compel them or the government compels them. And if market forces are shaped by them while this is in its embryonic stages and then they influence government oversight, I just see there's a path here where before it even has a chance to really get out there and become like a competitive market, it's already like captive. And the four biggest tech companies have all the engineers, they have all the IP, they've set all the rules, and then it's going to be like, okay, so their profits get bigger and the rest of things. This is where I come back to what you were saying, Theodora. Like, change, sure, like on some levels, but fundamentally, as like who we are as beings, as organisms, I do sometimes think we overstate how much this stuff actually really changes us versus maybe shapes our thinking of like what we see and experience, but doesn't really fundamentally change things as much as I think we sometimes are concerned that it will. So anyway, it's a long-winded statement, right? But I think it's like, I think we need to have some oversight. That'd be my position. Some oversight I think is necessary. And a pump the brakes kind of mentality, I think is a good one.
I absolutely
slow things down.
And I think at
I'm
large,
like, pedal down. Let's go. Let's go.
Just dive right in. I think at large, we need to have a more coherent strategy on how we can level out the playing field, right? So a couple of things. First and foremost, the people that have access to technology that can take advantage of them is a sliver of the society. What's going to happen to the rest of the people? What's going to happen to the rest of the world that do not have access to the technology? And a lot of these tech is built based on Western languages, is built based on what we know, how we do things. What about the global South? What about people who don't use English as their language, right? So are we thereby creating a larger divide? And if this is going to be our future, what are we going to do to change it? That's the part when I say is going to change how we live and how we work, because it is increasing the divide of the haves and have-nots.
It's funny that not funny. I shouldn't say it's funny. It's not funny. It's actually not funny at all. But it's interesting that you make that point, because I constantly am hearing from the fan people, fanboys and girls and non-binary folks, that AI is going to make things like, oh, this kid in in urban Detroit who can't get access to, a calculus tutor, they can have one now, right? And the girl in Sudan, right, who just wishes that she could learn whatever, right? Like, this is sort of the tech utopian fantasy that kind of, I feel it covers over, it smooths over a lot of the maybe other implications. And my feeling has been similar to yours, Theodora, which is like, my expectation is that those who have access to the tech will use it to their advantage, and then the gap will widen, right? I don't know. Are we in the extreme minority of seeing things that way?
Because every time when I say that, people look at me like, no.
They think it's democratizing information, right? They've bought into this sort of promise that we are going to give the best thinking in the world to everyone.
Right.
So why is that not the case? Because the English piece, I think, is really good. So let's just, I think it's even true within this English speaking world that it's likely to have it's going to increase that disparity. I'm curious, like, what do you see there?
I think the other part is digital inclusion. We are not thinking enough about digital inclusion. The entire world of the future that we have is built on having access to affordable internet. Affordable internet. A lot of people don't have internet access. A lot of people cannot afford internet access. And we're not just talking about rural, we're talking about urban, right? So it costs money.
Right.
We tend to forget that. I have a gig pipe in here, but sometimes it's easy to forget it costs money to get that.
Yeah.
And So is this increasing the divide? Absolutely hell yes. Unless we can get to the point where we say, you know what? This is the starting point. We need to level up the playing field for everyone. We will make sure that everyone on the planet have access to broadband internet. And then we can start from there. But of course, we'll not get there. So
I agree on that front for lots of reasons. And I think so my added sort of perspective on this particular subtopic is also that I think community and local culture and the capability of, let's just say, parents to be available because they're making enough money that they can then also like guide their children in terms of like learning. Like it's, for me, we'd get a bigger bang for our proverbial buck if we invested in lifting up the conditions of working families, so that they could be more available to support their children than to say, hey, we're going to give everybody a fiber connection and free access to AI, and then the bots will teach the kids and the parents can keep working 3 jobs.
I think we need both.
And everything's going to get better because the technology is giving them world-class Stanford education at home, which they won't use.
Right. If you were in front of me, I would have given you a big hug. I can't agree with
thank you.
I can't agree with you more. Unfortunately, we do live in a society where if people are poor, we blame them on being poor. If people have poor health, we blame them on having poor health. So,
well, but this issue is, I think, going to make that worse because now it'll be like, well, look, we gave you the AI, like we gave you a free subscription. Like, what you can't learn differential equations. Like, what's I don't know what else you want us to do. Like, what else can we do now?
My middle school son, he tried to use ChatGPT to help him debug his Python code. He came back after a few days. He's like, "This thing's working."
I know. Well, you know, I saw last week was really fascinating. Cheating is not up since the introduction of ChatGPT because it's shit. It doesn't work. It's garbage. Like, have you ever? I know, Ted, you and I have different maybe opinions on this. I have almost never. I've tried it hundreds of times, just because, right? Like, I've almost never found anything of value coming from that process that I've been able to take into my actual life or work and make what I would have done by myself without that system supporting me better. In some cases, it was worse because I spent like an hour trying to get it to do something and then it didn't get there, and I needed to do it myself anyway, right?
Exactly.
So I also, that's the other piece of it. I don't even think it's all that good.
But
yeah, I definitely have a different opinion on that one.
Oh, well, let's hear it.
Do tell.
Yeah, I mean, just for me.
Wait, is this really you, or is this like a avatar?
No, this is not an avatar.
Okay.
Oh no! Wait, I see.
Right?
Camera.
Other legs. Legs.
So
I see a Microsoft logo showed up in the upper corner of your screen.
Oh, crap.
What's going on?
I'm just kidding. Oh my gosh. No, I mean, realistically, when I look at it, and it's not just ChatGPT, there are a number of them that I leverage for different reasons. And a lot of times it's not meant for me to create something using it or to use what was created. Let me word it that way. It wasn't meant to use what was created. What I've leveraged it for are to help me break the way that I'm looking at something, or it's like, this is kind of the thought process that I had. Does it make any sense? And if you put something that doesn't make any sense in there and you ask it to help you explain it, it's going to tell you in one way or another whether or not you're making any sort of sense. And so leveraging it to do that, or even doing a lot of the research to talk to you all today to find and go through this, I was able to traverse tons and tons of articles across the web, pull them in, ask it to annotate and tell me which articles it came from, then tell me what the similarities were across the board, tell me what the differences were. And so that gave me that piece of going, okay, well, here are the external opinions. I don't agree with that. I agree with that. that one doesn't make any sense at all. So I'm just going to put that as an outlier. But like, and maybe that's just my personal bias too, right? So really doing that to be able to get the information in and not have to spend hours clicking on every single article or reading it and taking a note to what I captured. Like I can literally have it do a word for word scan of all of these things and tell me how many of the same words were used. And you'd be amazed at like how many people have just taken the same thing and republished it again. But that has been huge, especially when I'm doing research on projects and on information.
And usually in this case, it's stuff you don't know very well, right? And that's when it's been helpful.
No,
if you know it. Is that true or no?
No, that's not true, because I'm very familiar with this, but I don't know how other people feel about it or what other people have said.
Well, that's the same thing, right? Because that would be like, you know, the topic, but maybe you're not familiar with some aspect, right? And this aspect in this case is opinion, right? You want to know like,
external opinion. Yeah.
Yeah. So you want to get a sense of like, what is, like, I know my view, I know a lot about the topic, but I don't know the broad like perspective. So that's an interesting way to use the tool. Never thought about trying that.
That's I know that I write in a very specific way that sometimes is extremely hard for other people to understand, even myself sometimes. So I will ask it to dumb it down, and then I'll get an understanding of like how to bring the verbiage I've used down to a lower level. And then I tweak it in order to still feel like me.
Wouldn't it be nice if you could just know how to do that though?
Yeah, but that takes time of learning.
But that's the fun part of it. It's just like reading. I think I got what
But I
you're
have
saying.
more fun figuring out the prompts to use to get it to do what I want it to do than I do actually doing the thing.
Okay. I get that. I don't know. I find joy in digging.
I love our response to that.
I am the weirdo who used to pick up a thing of Britannica Encyclopedia and read through it. So this is me. I find joy in flipping through and serendipity learning. I had never used that for what I write, because I always have a wonderful editor that's cleaned up my stuff. But I have
a human editor.
Human.
Yeah.
I like humans. I'm like this old school dinosaur. I love humans. I had used it recently for graphics, and it has failed me miserably.
It's not meant to create so that's the other piece, is that it's not meant to actually create.
I'll tell you what it did.
It's meant to give you inspiration, because it is not at a point where it cannot do that.
It gave me inspiration for my newsletter tomorrow. That's what it did.
Stay tuned.
Support provided by Skyflow. What if you could build fast but not break privacy? What if you could ensure data privacy, governance, and compliance with just a few API calls? What if you could worry less about PCI requirements while actually improving privacy and security? How much more time would your team have to truly innovate? How much faster could you build and ship new features? How much more powerful could your app be? Skyflow is a zero-trust data privacy vault delivered as an API. Skyflow's radically simple design lets you collect, secure, and tokenize personal information like card data and payment details. And with built-in features like encrypted data analysis and sharing, anonymization, and advanced governance, your days of choosing between data security and data usability are over. Whether you're just concerned with PCI compliance or need to go further to include CCPA, GDPR, SOC 2, and beyond, Skyflow has you covered. What if you could build fast but not break privacy? With Skyflow, you can. Visit skyflowsecure.com today to learn how.
Oh yeah, I asked it to create an image for me that depict a group of fintech founders talking about predictions for the new year. Do you want to guess what they all look like?
White man
in suits.
No, not just that. It's
in the hoodies, in suits.
Oh no hoodies. It's all rode up shirts with beautiful jackets and beautiful hair. Beautiful hair. Every single one of them had beautiful hair. And
isn't that important?
3 different tools, and they all came out the same. It was wild. I'm like, really? really? None of the founders I work with look like that, but okay. So yeah.
But I think so. So here's kind of where I go when we start talking about language models and this level of the AI that we're talking about right now is that piece of it. Is it that we don't know how to ask the right questions?
Are you talking about prompt engineering? Is this like, are you blaming Theodore and I for not being good at prompts?
Yeah,
No.
we clearly don't know what the heck we're doing.
No, but what I'm saying is like, are we not asking questions or asking the right questions or asking them in the right way based upon the perspective of all the data that's out in the world today?
Are you referring to?
I wouldn't get that.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to force it to say, please make sure you have mixed gender in your graphic. Come on.
Isn't that interesting?
But you would be describing what you wanted to have. That's the piece you have to look at.
No, the default though. See, the default would probably feel pretty okay to somebody that looks like us, Ted.
No,
actually, no, it actually doesn't. It
only Ted. Me. Yeah, only Ted.
It's fair.
Oh my gosh. No, but where I was going is it.
This is why he likes AI so much. I see what's going on now. Every time he comes back, it's like there's a picture of this beautifully coiffed, like, tech savvy dude. And high five, Ted. I loved your essay. I got some tips for you.
No, and where I was going with that is like it will show the biases that have been there for years. By all means, it will always show the biases because that's what all of our content is. If you look back at one of the very first generative AI bots that Microsoft tried out at the very beginning, it immediately became a white supremacist that was full of hate speech. Like it was.
Well, that one was self-learning too, though, right? That one I don't think started with a large language model. It was more that people were like, "This will be fun. We're going to turn this thing into a monster."
But the thing is that what they did was they gave it an information source that was supposed to be diverse in information and diverse in opinions and diverse across the board, only to realize that when it started looking at the information, it wasn't diverse. It wasn't that way. The way it was being used was a completely different than the perception of how it was being used, and what was there is completely different than reality. Mm-hmm. And this is where I go into talking about the prompt engineering and asking the right questions. Because where we are at today and the biases that play in and all of the inequity that there is, that means that we have to ask the questions, the right questions, and ask the questions the right way to be able to change the outcome. Because if we don't ask the right questions in the right way, then all we will get are more pictures of white dudes with great hair. Thank you. Wearing hoodies and pushed up sleeves.
Let me ask you this. Is asking Amazon Alexa, is the last presidential election stolen? Is that a proper question to ask? Because apparently,
that is not a complete question, though.
According to Amazon Alexa, which for a while was pulling information from a particular website that might not be a mainstream website, that asserted that indeed the last election was stolen and it was full of fraud. How should
if you had asked the question,
then reword my prompt to get the proper information?
Well, you're getting the answer you probably want, right? If you're asking that question, you probably want that answer, I would suspect, right?
Based upon the biases that it has, based upon the things
it would reinforce, the questioner's bias in that case.
So, right, and it can go on and go on, and never mind that Amazon Alexa is indeed a news site that a lot of people rely on. You can always say that is not the source, but you know what? You pull it from a source. So then my next question would be...
Yeah, nobody wants to sit there and listen to Alexa go, this was pulled from website, It's just like, next, stop. As soon as you're done hearing the answer, you just move on.
So whose responsibility?
But that goes back. So I'm going to answer Matt first, and then come out and say comment. And that, Matt, is exactly why disclosure does not work when you start to regulate.
Certainly in an audio format, 100%.
Oh, come on. Even the
100%
T's and
agree.
C's you need to click through. Who reads that?
Nobody reads the T's and C's. Nobody does. Well, actually, I'm one of the weird people that does read the T's and C's.
You do?
So I do read T's and C's. Like when I really want to understand something and like a company.
Like even on the app, when you're clicking through, you read through the T's and C's before you download.
I won't do it on the app first. I'll go to the app store and read them there normally. Like I said, I am not normal and I'm not like anybody else.
He sends to chat.
Do a summary.
Oh,
I really like you. Next time when I'm in the Bay Area, I'll come find you.
Ted really likes me too right now.
Well, I'm changing my opinion very, very fast. No, seriously. But I mean, really looking at it, it's like that's. I guess what I'm trying to get at is that if you're asking a general question or a general piece and you're not wanting the specifics or you're not really, it doesn't matter to you, then yeah, you're going to get something that's based on general biases and everything that's out in the marketplace.
Yeah. Then most people, I think, would probably.
This goes back to my tax thing, right? I would want to know where every 100th of a penny goes. And most people are like, I'm okay with like every $10 or I'm okay with every 1,000 or whatever it is, right? I want to know down to the 10th decimal. And that's the difference.
Can I want to just come back to the fintech AI topic for a sec.
Wait, that was how
I want to make a big statement, and then you all can react to this and tell me if you have what do you think? At this moment in time, I see virtually no specific use cases within payments. That's my landscape, right? So I'm just going to talk about payments, where generative AI is likely to be useful in any meaningful way.
I agree.
With only payments data, I will agree. But if you add on additional data,
payments, like, let's just paint the bigger picture of payments if you want, right around. Like I say, I'm not talking about like the customer service interaction, like surrounding payments. Mm-hmm. I think it could and has already kind of like benefited from. Well, for certain, what I would have referred to in the past is like conversational AI, generative conversational AI, which is like the newest version of that same mode of interaction. I think that can be fine. But it's almost always limited to a very narrow, like, language set. Like its knowledge is very much constrained to serve the purpose of answering questions about a domain. I think in that area, it can be very effective because you can train it to answer things very accurately and to also know when it's appropriate to say, look, I can't help. I'm gonna get a human being into the flow. That's a space where I think things have already been done that have shown value, will get better, are already getting better, and I think that area is like one that makes a lot of sense for us to continue to explore.
I agree.
Consensus, Ted?
Ted's thinking. He's thinking.
Well, I mean, I agree. I agree with the customer service. I mean, I still remember when IPsoft rolled out Amelia, which was a conversational chatbot that was put into many financial institutions to help people navigate their websites, to help them navigate a number of different questions that they would have that had standard answers to. And I think that as we progress with these large language models and getting into it, you're going larger and larger language models. And then especially with Google getting into the multimodal version that isn't three modes put together at the final end, but them running together and crisscrossing at the same time, our levels of customer service are going to skyrocket. Our abilities to understand the information from multiple areas and how they impact each other are going to continue to grow. You know, a perfect example, and someone, if you can take this and run with it, please do. But the idea that I had the other day was, what if I could take something like Whisper that OpenAI has, and I could make a phone call to somebody after they've submitted something and just say, hey, I want to verify and or validate some information. Then I ask them, can you tell me your street address? Can you tell me this? Can you tell me this? Cool. Now that you've done this, you'll receive notification or you'll get this or what have you of the next step of your process. And so, because a lot of times people may not know how to write it the right way within the system, they may not understand the label that was used on a document and they used the wrong terminology or the wrong formatting. And just by having a quick conversation, that can get across a lot faster than trying to educate them on how to answer the question properly, as we were just talking about. Mm-hmm. And I see that happening a lot in anything having to do with risk and underwriting, is really getting into all these different multimodal areas. Heck, even being able to pull in data from social media, publicly available social media, to get, what are they saying? How did they say that? Does that pull into my model? How do I use that to assess risk and or credit? Like those types of things, I see that being coming into it. Again, I'm on lending and on that side of the house. But you mentioned that payments, you don't see any benefit. I think
for generative AI specifically, in the facilitation of payments, setting aside, as I mentioned, the support surrounding any financial services, I think support around financial services is a really clear, like, go into it. To your point, how do you make an interaction more personalized? How do you also give people insights that are valuable to them, that improve their knowledge and use of the service? Potentially, then you're also talking now about like credit, fraud. I think that's where you start to get back into our ethical sort of potential is there, but are the guardrails like clearly established? Like, you know, how far do you go from becoming the next Cambridge Analytica, and you've got not just public social media but a private pipe, right? And now I'm making lending decisions based on stuff that I didn't think my bank saw my Instagram, or, you know, maybe that's a bad example, my whatever, content. So I think it can be done over there.
That exists already. I wanted to say about what Tedd was just talking about, using social media information. I think it was about 2 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. There was a company, a fintech in India. I don't know if they're still around, but a lot of their micro lending decisions, it is made, that particular company is using WhatsApp as an information source, as well as other social media.
The end-to-end encrypted messaging app, WhatsApp?
Yeah. Somehow they were able to, if I remember, India was one of the first countries that they were able to do that. It wasn't this year, it was before.
No, is it private messages or public, like interactions with like a merchant kind of?
Mm-hmm.
I see.
Because in WhatsApp, you can put like your status, and you can change pictures, and you can post to public channels.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they did was they use all of those interactions, public interactions, to infer the credit worthiness and the risk of lending to those particular people. The problem with that was that they then, if you do not go back and pay your loans on time, you got harassed because you got a phone number and everything in there. And then the next step was they shut off the access of your mobile phone until you pay your loan. I forgot the name of that company, but that did happen. And it was a big problem because these things are our lives, right? You lose access, especially in a lot of countries, you lose access to your mobile phone. You don't have a landline. This is your way to get out to the internet, to connect to people, to order a ride and buy groceries and what have you. So that became, what you were just saying, Matt, a big ethical problem. Is what is your mind?
That goes into your access question too, right? Is if you remove my access to have, let's say I can afford it except for I've chosen not to do something. Have you just restricted my access in order to repay that debt, may only making it worse? And the ethical questions that go into that, that's another place. And I guess I'm looking at, when we talk about the actual payment flow, if you're leveraging the ISO 222 format, let's just say that we get really excited and somebody actually uses it.
You got my ears pricked up when I heard that.
But if you were to use a format like that, then you're able to understand a lot more. You're able to speed up or say, I'm not going to, it's not a decline transaction. It's not an approved transaction. It's a transaction that's in review, and then move that into another model to determine, or to a human, to make the one.
I think machine learning is a better solution for structured transaction review and decisioning. Like, I'm just saying the generative AI tech.
But if Tedd always
ISO 20022 message is like, it's just, I don't see how it's helpful.
Well, but if you get the data around the frequency or the type of product or the type of service it is, if Tedd always, every time that he buys his dog food in massive bulk, he decides that for that particular one, what he's going to do is he's going to split it into 4 payments over the next 4 months because he bought 4 months worth of dog food. Well,
but you don't need Gen AI to do that, is my point. Machine learning is a great solution to solve that problem. Deep learning can give you also some of those same like quantitative insights. Like, fraud models are already using a lot of this technology, like, very successfully. One of the guys I look to for because I'm not an expert in fraud, but if you follow like Sardine, right? Soups is a CEO of Sardine AI. It's funny, they say AI, and then he's very public about saying mostly it's machine learning, right? In reality, when he talks about like the fraud analytics.
Machine learning, yeah. So I see where you're going.
Well, I'm just distinguishing kind of, if we skip back to the front where we didn't really define what AI is, we could have said at that point in time is that it's an umbrella term that includes a lot of different technologies. This idea of like a machine learning and neural network that can take a set of fairly structured inputs and then watch for deviations from a trend, make some predictions, indicate like something that's appearing to fall outside of a tolerance. It's not just a simple like plus or minus range that adapts based on a whole lot of different variables. Like, that technology is extremely valuable. It's just not new. That's not what OpenAI is building, right? Like, and so that's the piece where I just feel that the hype is around the thing people can see and touch and talk to. The real value, in my opinion, for payments is in improving the technology that we've already been building on for like 10, 15, 20 years.
And so maybe I'm looking at it I'm looking at it as I'm an analyst, or I'm a person that wants to know specifically about this data, and I ask it a question. It's able to go pull that data and then give me a real English language version, or a real language version, versus a spreadsheet.
Analytics. Yeah, I think analytics is that I think is a great example of,
but that's tied to
that's a conversational AI, right? And that would include a Gen AI component. Whether you're the consumer wanting to inquire about your own, data, or you're, a fraud analyst that's looking for answers to specific questions. I do see your point. Like, I think that is that can be very useful. Instead of like I'm going to write a SQL query and then I'm going to go do a pivot table and then I'm going to look for the thing and I'm going to click. I agree. That's a good idea too.
Here's what's happening is that you're thinking the actual transmission of the data within
for payments, yes,
to transfer. Yeah. And when I think payments, I think of everything that goes around that whole life cycle of a payment.
Touching money.
Like, I think of the whole life cycle.
I think it's good to distinguish. Good to distinguish that. Analytics around purchases.
Exchange of value, period.
Yeah. I mean, sure. For me, payments is moving money, right? Like, when you actually are transacting, you are facilitating the movement of value from point A to point B or C or D, whatever it might be. That's a payment, and then there's data that surrounds the payment, metadata that surrounds the payment that you can then, see in real time during a flow. You can also inquire about it after the fact. That's, I would say, is like data analytics, and that can include lots of other stuff too, like lending and other credit, like tons of stuff. So I try to put the world in boxes. Maybe it's not helpful. It's just the way my brain works to say like, where's it? Because I'm always looking for like right tool for the job. Because usually it's like, we've got this hammer, let's like, where's the nails? Let's go find some nails, instead of like, I start in payments as transaction processing primarily. And I ask myself, like, what are the problems that I'm facing? And what's the best tool to go solve them? So I start with the problem first and then go, what's the best solution out there? Not to say it's the right way to do it. It's just, that's how I see it.
And I know I am a non-linear thinker, which that completely boggles my mind on like how you could look at it in a singular line, because nothing is singular, at least from my perspective. And so for me, I look at, okay, well, I have this thing. What can it do? And then
this is probably why in our previous conversation, you were so, you connected so much with that innovation lab example that we talked about where at Wells Fargo, they developed these technologies that I thought had no purpose in real life, but you are very interested in like what they could do, right? And so I think both kinds of thinking are really helpful. That there's people out there that are coming up with stuff and then being like, hey, look, I made this thing, and then go look for ways that it could solve, be helpful. And then there's people like me that are like, oh, wait, what'd you do? Can I use it here? And so I think it's like having the kind of like tools that are just kind of being made and published. And now here it is with no idea necessarily, like say in OpenAI's example, they didn't start off with a commercial plan. They just started off with like a technology. And now the commercial kind of concepts are like coming in. And so when I look at that as a payments kind of like transaction flow kind of person, I'm saying, okay, no matches in the flow. Outside the flow, sure, lots of times.
What would you like for it to do ultimately, Ted? I'm curious. Because I'm looking at the two of you here, right? You are like the artist that has a bucket and you splash the paint on the wall and they try to imagine what it is. Matt, on the other hand, is like, I'm going to set out, draw a cube. And here are the tools I need. And this is the cube I draw. So you two are very different, but I'm very curious to hear from you, Ted. What would you like for the technology to ultimately do?
So I think for me, what I look for the bucket of artificial intelligence to do is to not replace and or do things for us, but help us progress and move forward and look at things differently so that we can understand it in a different light. That's really, as I see the whole bucket of artificial intelligence, it really is, yes, will it replace some things? Yes. Are those things that are not innately human? Most likely. They're motions. They're things that just are repetitive in nature. It just happens. It's another one of those. And I really think what it's going to do is really have a resurgence in the arts, really. Because as Matt, as you mentioned, everything that you've put in doesn't come out the way that you want it to come out because it's not you. It's not creative. It's not your mind making that creative decision.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and I used it from a different perspective, as Theo mentioned, is that I said, I've got this idea, help me like explode it and I can take out the things that I don't like. Right. And I think you're going to start to get that. And even Theo's comment about the creating the image. Like to me, I was like, okay, well, that's not the image I was looking for. Why did it do that? How can I get it? How can I create the image that I'm looking for? And so that's really what I'm seeing this being able to do, is to bring on a new generation of creative expression through numbers and through letters that we've never seen before. And I think it's really going to have us all thinking differently and changing the way we perceive the world around us.
How would that change the movement of money?
Say that one more time.
How would that change how we move money and how we perceive money?
I think it changes what we value and how we value it. And by that, that's why I keep coming back and why I try my best to say an exchange of value. Because what we see as money today or something of value, it's all equated back to it. But it's not always been a fiat currency. It could be, we had the gold standard for a long time. Before that, if you look at the history of money, it's always been something that was limited in availability. And so I think we're just going to see a transition into what we find valuable and how we assess that value on it. And this will give us the ability to look at things differently versus a 1-to-1 ratio like we've been doing for a very, very long time.
When I did one of my Sybos presentations a few years back, people asked me, what is the future of money? What would the future of money look like? And I said it would be access to clean water and access to clean air. That was how I perceive the world and how we value things. Slightly different to your point, but is something that I believe is becoming more scarce and is going to be something that will be of value only to those who can afford it. And then the questions become, how do we enable access to those scarce resources, and what would be the roles of financial services in the middle? We're getting to be very philosophical at the hour.
Wow.
Sorry.
This is definitely very philosophical. So there are a couple questions that I just wanted to make sure. I mean, we've been talking for some time, but I want to dive into a couple things. First, in financial services and financial technologies, what are one or two products and or services that you've seen in the marketplace that you believe have promise or are solving a problem? And I'll start with you, Matt.
Yeah, I think there's one area that I think is I'd really like to see a lot more work happen around, that I know is beginning, but I haven't seen it in my own experience, like really like start to work, because it's one of those areas that's like so risky that I think there's a reluctance to outsource really any kind of function to either a different company or even especially technology that you don't fully understand. And that's like sanction screening and suspicious activity reporting. There's a lot of like administrative excess that goes into screening, looking at potential matches, determining if something is a real match, false positive. A lot of overhead that's not valuable, right? Like we're doing things to try to like prevent a real, there's bad stuff we're trying to protect people and, the world from. So I think it's a good process that we need to do. We need to do it. But I think that because of the administrative effort of trying to like evaluate all this stuff with like, some systems, but they're not that great. And then human oversight, which is just stretched really thin. And then when it comes time to really dig deep in understanding like something that looks like it could be a significant issue, you don't have a lot of time to really invest in going deep. It's kind of like a doctor who is seeing so many patients that they can only talk to their people for like 15 minutes. They can never go very deep into anything. So it's like, are there ways that we could use technology to dramatically improve our confidence that when somebody's looking at a case, it's very likely a real problem, versus 80, 85, 90 out of 100 times, I'm really excluding this from consideration because it was flagged and it's actually not a big deal. But that's the majority of things that get in front of a human being.
So I think it's hilarious that you brought that up because, before we got on, I let you know who the sponsors were going to be for this episode. And one of our sponsors happens to start to solve for that exact problem. That's been their focus from day one, is leveraging machine learning and other AI deep learning technologies to really make it so that when things really look out of place based upon tons and tons of training data, what they're able to do is distill it down to one or two that really need that human review to identify the piece of it. So I think that's really interesting that you brought that topic up.
What I'd be curious to hear from you or them or whatever. So it's kind of like, I think there's this idea of like, you got to prove that the tech actually does that effectively, and then convince, banks in most cases who there's serious like penalties if you miss something. Right. And so there's this sort of idea that like, I'm going to over kind of like index on examining things because the cost of missing a case that actually turns out to have been whatever it might be, right, is so expensive that I gotta just invest in it, right? So I'd be curious to hear like how do you show that the technology is good enough, right, to enable you to just ignore stuff that otherwise the previous generation of the system would have said you should look at this before you let it go.
Yeah, and there are a number of financial institutions and other groups that have felt that as they'd gone through and looked at it, that this provides a much larger reward than the overarching risk. And they're starting to see that. Now, exactly how they got into it, that is a piece that I will be covering in an entire product review of the product in the near future. So we'll be diving into that piece of it.
Cool.
But Theo, what is one that you've seen in your travels and all the great people you've been able to talk to that really perked your ears up?
I know there's something I would love to see. I'm borrowing from Matt's response that we're not quite there yet, unfortunately. So one of the areas that's always been really intriguing, and I touched a little bit upon that, is how we're living longer and we're living differently. The tools that have been at our disposal and the way we relate to money, unfortunately, has not changed. A lot of the assumptions for basic financial planning still is you go to school, get a job,
Save
start
more,
a family, keep spending, credit card debt, retire, and here you go, wealth transfer. It's been the same model forever and ever. What we have forgotten is that a lot of people don't subscribe to that anymore. We don't do that anymore. We could be going to school, work, go back to school, later in life start a family, much later in life start a family, start a business, right? Like, what I said, I always like to use myself as an example because I turned 50 last month. I started my company in my mid-40s. My parents are late 70s. My children are young. They're still in elementary school and middle school. Now, if you look at trajectory of how we live and how long we live, in 10 years' time, I will be 60. My kids will be in college. We all know how expensive college is in the United States. My parents will be in the late 80s, meaning they will need help. And unfortunately, they had decided that they would live somewhere else abroad because they couldn't afford to grow old here and bear the healthcare cost anymore, which is becoming a problem. Now, me, I like to plan ahead. What do I need to do in my next 10 years so that I know I can be a place that I can have a secure financial future for my next 30 years? At the same time, I'll be able to support my 2 children going to college. At the same time, I could support my parents who will be almost 90. At the same time, I can keep doing what I like to do. Human can't do that. We sort of need help from technology. We sort of need help from beyond what a current human advisor can do. We need something that is not static. We need something that can continue to change and evolve the planning, much like how we step into a car for GPS navigation. It knows to reroute you if there is traffic, if there is an accident. It knows to reroute you if you change your destination, if you want to add a stop in the middle. I don't have that for money. I don't. What do? I would love to see that before I go broke in 10 years. That's my hope. It's $500,000 per child for college in
But are you
10
seeing
years'
anybody
time.
that's headed in the right direction?
I did. There was a startup that I met when I was in ARP quite a few years ago that they were going in that direction. But this is the problem when I started in the space. This is like quite a while ago. People were like, we don't do old people. I got told on stage, we do not do old people. The perception of planning for longevity is not a sexy concept for people who like to fund startups, even though they all tell me they do have parents and they do relate to the situations because they themselves would have the same challenge. But no, we don't do old people. Here you go. Bias nut.
We go back to the bias that we were talking about at the very beginning.
I had to bring you back.
I know. I appreciate it. All right. So last but not least, I want you to pull out your crystal ball or put on your future glasses, whichever one you want to do. We're not getting into the hot tub time machine, but when you look forward, where do you see very specifically the trends of generative AI inside of fintech really making a difference? And making a difference is based on your personal perspective. It doesn't have to be fiscal or altruistic of any sort. It just, where do you feel it'll make the most difference? I'll let whichever one will start first.
No time frame? I thought you were going to ask like 2024.
10 years. Let's go 10 years.
Whoa, 10 years.
In the next 10 years, what do you see generative AI, deep learning, and fintech 10 years from now?
I'll see what I can tell you something that I saw a few months ago that seemed really interesting is not so much so generative AI, but more so using the data and understanding what people need and understanding the bankable moments. I'll go back to bankable moments. That's been one of my favorite this year. Is if we look at communities and you look at how we define communities, the old notion of community, being at a geographical state is different, right? So you define community as people, you define communities of things that bring them together. You define communities as employees, people that work for, let's say, a particular company. What keep people up at night is, can I pay my bills? Can I afford to do the things I need to do? Do I need to work 2 jobs, 3 jobs to make ends meet? So what is the role of employers? Knowing the people that are working for them and knowing who they are and what they need and what they want, how can they be in a position to help facilitate the particular services that their employees need to get them to a more secure financial future? I think that's where I see promise. I've seen a company that is able to do that, looking at an overall quote unquote financial health score for each of the employee and then matching them up to the services of the variety of community banks and credit unions that are in their network, thereby creating a specific suite of services that helps them in that particular position, to be able to personalize what they need for that person instead of saying, oh, you know what, you're banking at, Bank ABC down the street. You're going to take all of the suite of services, which doesn't always work. I want something from this one. I want something from this one because this is the life stage I'm in right now. And kind of like magic, but not magic, you bring them together. That's where I see more intentional use of technology and data to create better financial future for people. I do see that happening.
Matt, how do you follow up that one, man? Wow.
I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to say that, let me paint the most optimistic picture that I think, like assuming things are just in a way that are on the whole kind of like going in a positive direction. I think there's risks, but I think there's definitely ways that I see things playing out that are sort of positive, and that I think are important for us to kind of like already sort of anticipate impacts in order to prepare current, people who are working, and then the next generation of young people who are entering the workforce it's mostly that next generation that I think is going to bear the brunt of these changes, to be honest. Everyone keeps saying like, oh, the older workforce isn't going to be AI savvy, right? And they're going to struggle. It's like they need to learn these new skills. I actually think the opposite problem, at least based on what I see right now, is more likely, which is like one of the things that we use the technology for today is summarizing call reports. And so like historically, that was something that an inside salesperson would sit on calls, hear the account exec talk to a client, take a bunch of notes, and then after the meeting, they would write up the notes and they send it to everybody. So everyone has the notes on the meeting. Now that person doesn't need to sit on the call. The AI agent sits on the call and listens to everything and then regurgitates it out into a summary. And the summaries are like good enough, let's just say, like in most cases. That role was not simply like grunt work, even though it is grunt work. It was also, it gave you a seat at the table to then like observe how does the process of engaging in a strategic conversation, like how does it work, right? And so now we're going to have to figure out, I think, so that is going to become just standard. Like it's already close. I think it's going to become more and more and more standard. And then look at things like prospecting, right? Like how do I find clients? Or how do I making initial contact with a client? Like those are going to become very, very high quality, both in terms of finding the right targets, like exactly who, with the right message that understands that person, what their role is, what their company does, what your company does, and creates like communications that convey something that's, I think, it's going to be pretty effective, right? So this whole process of taking your new service and then marketing it, I think will become will require a lot less human direction, human steering and effort. And so I think that's not a bad thing. However, then I think we need to ask ourselves, like, okay, the next group that's coming in, like, what is their job, right? Like, like how do we help everyone kind of like learn the basics of human interaction? And
you're playing right into kind of what I see in the next 10 years is the importance of face-to-face interaction, the importance of building relationships, the importance of the transparency, the importance of the empathy, just all of the really human stuff about us is going to be so much more important because all the things that can be non-human are just going to happen. And so we will have to do one of two things, either become really, really good at communicating with each other and building that relationship, or the other side of the house is we don't. And unfortunately, we become very, very lonely people. And so I think when you start to look at fintech, what it does is it will allow a lot of people to this sounds really bad, put it on autopilot and say, this is the outcome that I want. Let that happen. and then go spend the time with their friends and their family and all these other things to let them move forward. I really think that that's the piece that it's really going to allow us to do, is to build relationships, whether it be inside of business or outside of business.
I hope so. I think it could. It's a question is like, we got to choose that, right? That isn't just going to happen. Yeah. Like it's got to be an intent that we all sort of.
You can't regulate it. And on that,
you cannot regulate it.
And on that note,
I was going to say, use that free time to learn Kobo. That's what I tell my son.
Free time to learn Kobo. Yeah.
Someone needs to maintain it. I'm sorry.
And it'll be around forever. You guys, thank you, Theo, for joining. I know we went really, really long today, but it was so interesting to get down into the philosophical levels and bring it back up into the technology and really look at it from a world view versus a very North American view. Matt, as always, thank you for putting me on the spot and forcing me to think and look at things differently. It's always greatly appreciated. And I can't wait until the next episode of Fintech Confidential's Uncut. As we wrap up today's episode, I've got one last thing for you. If you're in the trenches fighting fraud and financial crime, you know it's a complex battlefield. That's where Hawk's AI tools for real-time payment screening, AML, transaction monitoring, and dynamic customer risk rating come into play. These aren't just buzzwords. They're game changers designed to make your compliance more effective and less of a headache. Imagine slashing through false positives with precision and giving your compliance strategy the edge it needs. Head on over to GetHawkAI.com to sign up for a demo and discover how their platform can revolutionize how you fight fraud and financial crime.
This has been a production of DD3 Media with all rights reserved. This is provided for informational purposes only. It is not offered or intended to be used as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. We strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, but will not be responsible for any missing facts or inaccurate information. You comply and understand that you should use any of this information at your own risk. Cryptocurrencies are highly volatile financial assets, so research and make your own financial decisions.